Today's podcast is sponsored by Brandistock's Polearm Emporium. You can find Brandistock's in Upper Ramsbottom Street in the town of Thornistons, just past Mrs. Cockle's Codpiece Boutique. Brandistock's Polearm Emporium sells a wide range of halberds, glaives, and bohemian ear spoons. Ear spoons? That's not a real thing, is it? Ridiculous. What is this nonsense anyway? I can't believe I'm reduced to flogging this low-class commoner tat to pay my rent.
Hello, and welcome to Morris's unofficial tabletop RPG talk. I, as always, am your host, Morrus, aka Russ, or Russ, aka Morrus. With me, as always, is my ebullient co-host, Peter Coffey.
From the Southampton Guild of Role Players. Hello, Russ.
Hi, Peter.
Delighted to be here, as ever.
And I've got a special guest.
What? I was going to say, they didn't follow me here, they must have followed you here. Who are they?
I have a friend.
Hello.
Can you believe it?
No.
So with us here today
unlikely.
is... it's very unlikely. With us here today is Rodney Thompson, who you might know from such games as Lords of Waterdeep, the board game, Star Wars SAGA Edition, D&D 5th Edition,
Nice.
Last year's Dusk City Outlaws, and many other things. Hello, Rodney. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
We are fantastic.
Good.
Of course, for us,
To make you coffee. Hello.
of course, for us, it's mid-afternoon. For you, it's the crack of dawn.
And quite literally the crack of dawn, yes.
Yeah. I would say I'm sorry, but I'm not.
It's okay.
No.
Not in any way.
It's okay.
In China, man. In China. That's what I'm going to say. Like,
Well, yeah, that was always fun.
we're recording at 9 p.m.
So Rodney, how are you? I haven't seen you in, it must be like 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah, let's see here. It might have been longer than that because this year I went to Gen Con. This past Gen Con was my first one in 4 years. So it's probably been 4 or 5 years since we had our
it must have been 4 years,
traditional Sunday night beers.
Yeah. I always look forward to that.
Yeah.
No, I feel great the next morning. I always look forward to that.
Yeah, no, I'm doing well. Staying busy. I've been at Bungie now for almost 3.5 years. I have a 1.5-year-old son, and then I do my little side projects that are going on right now. So I don't sleep a whole lot anymore, but otherwise I'm doing fine.
Well, we'll talk a lot more about those side projects in a bit.
Yeah.
But for the moment, we dive into the show. So let's start with you, Peter. Peter,
Yes.
got a question for you.
What's the question, Russ?
What's caught your eyes this week in the world of RPGs?
Ooh, a little game called... Well, it's not a game. It's a setting for 5th Ed D&D, which, is very popular, I understand.
It is, I heard,
Yes.
yeah.
This one is called Espergenesis and is a science fiction setting. But
Espergenesis.
Espergenesis, yes. The idea being that all the races of this particular universe are espers who achieve genesis through the use of what's called Solarium, which is found within hypercubes of some description.
Wow.
It's only been released for a little bit. I've been very fortunate enough to have a bit of a sneaky peek at one of the PDFs. But yeah, no, very interesting. There's a lot to like, lots of nice flavour. They're really sticking to the 3 pillars of D&D design of social, combat and exploration. But they've also done things to make sure that things like having ray guns in the system do not massively overbalance everything else, which is let's face it, a perennial problem with game design. We've got these ideas.
Is it very much D&D 5e rules, or is it a modified set? Do you know?
Oh no, it's proper D&D 5e rules,
Straight down the line.
Yeah, but they've done a lot of adaptation and reflavouring in order to make it work properly. Which I haven't dived into a lot of detail because I say it's only fresh out. But no, I'm very excited by this.
One to check out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Worthwhile doing so. What's caught your eye, Russ?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, so you remember last week we had Grant Howitt on the show.
Grant and Chris.
But for the moment I'm talking about Grant specifically because he releases, which we didn't actually get round to mentioning last week, a one-page RPG every month.
Ooh,
which is literally one single sheet of paper with an entire RPG, including illustrations on it.
Including illustrations.
And I was just looking, his latest one just came out today. He does it over on Patreon. And this one is called Retrograde, which is a cyberpunk game.
Nice.
All on one sheet of paper. The concept is you wake up and you can't remember who you are or why you're there. And so a lot of these elements get added in throughout the game as you sort of remember who you are and why you're there. So you roll a d6 to determine what your name tag says, what you're wearing. So you might be wearing, I don't know, like data clerk robes or penitentiary overalls or something like that. You roll a d6 to determine what you're carrying. So you might have black market data bomb or a blast pistol or something. And what room you woke up in.
Oh.
And then the GM is going to roll for a couple of sort of elements of the setting, and then you're going to play through this one-page RPG, basically recovering your identity as you go.
Oh yes, but of course you don't know what your identity is because it's been randomly generated.
You don't. You've just got those clues that you start with.
Yeah, part of the fun. You discover it. That does sound like a lot of fun.
Well, we'll stick a link in your show notes, and then people can head on over and check that out.
Oh,
because as you know, he does loads of them. He's done, you've mentioned Honey Heist before, haven't you?
Yeah.
He's done.
You saw Skeleton Adventure. That was pretty good.
Yeah. So that's my thing this week. What about you, Rodney? You spotted anything in RPGs this week?
I don't know that I've
peeking out about?
I don't know that I've spotted anything new, but I certainly have been playing something that's at least new to me. I have a game group on Tuesday nights. We meet and we rotate the game that we're playing about every 3 or 4 sessions. So basically, a different game, a different game master every 3 or 4 sessions. It's a way that we can play a lot of different games because we all have huge collections of games sitting on our shelves that we never actually play. I know it's a common problem. We actually just last week started a game of the new Legend of the Five Rings from Fantasy Flight. And we've been playing through that, and we're playing through the starter box right now, and it's pretty interesting. I mean, I have no childhood nostalgia for the game because I didn't play it when I was growing up or anything, or when I was in college, but I love Legend of the Five Rings, and I can't necessarily explain why. I think it's just a combination of how rich the setting is and how interesting and different all the factions are. But we're playing right now and having a lot of fun, and usually when I play a role-playing game, I tend to, especially for the first time, I tend to try and play something very archetypal, right? Like, when we played Shadowrun for the first time, I wanted to play a street samurai, right? And when we played Vampire for the first time, I was like, okay, pick me the most right down the middle of the road vampire, and that's what I want to play. Because I want to kind of, I like to buy into the concept of the game and, play the game like the person, like the people who designed it wanted it to be played, right?
Exactly.
So I tend to do that the very first time, and I've played a fair amount of L5R before, and I usually like to play your very archetypal samurai, right? Because I like buying into the concept. And so this time we were handing out the pre-generated characters that come in the box set. I said to myself, I was like, okay, I'm gonna break out of my normal way to play, and so I was like, okay, give me the Scorpion Clan. I'm gonna be the backstabby traitorous character, which is not in my lane at all. Right?
No.
Even when I play D&D, I basically play paladins and I play rogues, but I play the nice rogues that are the rogues with a heart of gold, right? So
you're not usually playing a necromancer.
I don't know. I like good guys as part of it, right? But
fair enough.
I rebel against the idea that being a paladin means that you're lawful stupid, right? I'm like, no.
Oh, yeah.
You can be a good guy and do the right thing and be a cool, interesting character. So that's what I usually try and aim at, right? But this time around, I'm all backstabby. Of course, it's backstabby in the service of the Emperor, but
Oh yeah, totally legit. Yeah.
yeah. Sounds fair to me.
Right.
So, I think it's time we had a look at this week's news.
Oh, good idea. We should do that.
Well, apparently some books got released this week.
Really? Anything interesting?
Nah, nothing interesting. No. I've got a question for you. What do buses and D&D books have in common?
They come along 3 at a time?
Yeah, you wait all year for one and then suddenly 2 come out at once. Last Friday, Waterdeep Dungeon of the Mad Mage and the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica were both released. Unfortunately, I hear there's been some printing problems of some kind because they're not in our local shop in town, in Forbidden Planet yet, which is unfortunate, so I haven't seen it yet. But those people who get it on D&D Beyond and things like that have got it, and I think quite a few people over in the US have copies of the books. So I can't talk too much about them because I haven't seen them yet. But both books came out. We've kind of talked about them quite a bit on previous shows anyway. And I'm quite excited to get those. Like Ravnica is quite exciting for me because it's a new setting that I'm not familiar with at all. Not having played Magic the Gathering at all, it's completely new to me. And I think it's been Eberron was the last brand new D&D setting, and that was 15 years ago, maybe.
Well, unless you count the setting that was the default setting in 4th edition D&D.
Oh yeah, there's that. Yeah,
the Nintendo
points of light thing. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super excited to have a look at that one. I can't wait to start reading. I mean, we've got some up on Ian World. We've got a couple of first impressions, not quite reviews because they've pretty much got hold of the book, glanced through it from Beth, who is our reviewer over in the US, and she's done reviews of both of them. So I think in the next 2 weeks, assuming we can get hold of them over here, we can dive into, I think it's Waterdeep next week and Ravnica the week after, and have a look at those in detail.
Sounds good. We should do that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Can't wait for that. There's a bit of bad news, actually.
Oh, no. What's happened?
So do you recall it was about 2 years ago, John Wick had this massive Kickstarter for 7th Sea.
Yeah, that's right.
Made $1.3 million, I think it was.
I think it was approximately all the money, yeah.
It was a ridiculous amount of money. It's only been surpassed once, and that was by Matt Colville this year, and he doubled it, I think, with his Strongholds and Streaming, I think it was, or Strongholds and Followers, or something like that. Kickstarter. But up until then, John Wick had the record for the largest ever tabletop RPG Kickstarter. Unfortunately, he's announced this week that John Wick Presents is laying off all its staff.
Oh.
Financial issues of some kind. I don't know the exact details. I think it's important to say that of the Kickstarter awards, tons of them have been delivered. It's not like he's flaking out on the Kickstarter or anything like that, and I wouldn't want anyone to get that idea.
No.
At first, because I was a backer of it, and I got my copy of 7th Sea, the hardcover copy, ages and ages ago, like last year or something.
Yeah.
But there was a big flurry of releases coming out in the first year or so since the Kickstarter. And he's announced that while the further releases are still oncoming, people shouldn't really expect that sort of release schedule going forward. So everything's going to slow down a little bit there.
I mean, it was a pretty ambitious release schedule in the first place, right? Like
it was quite aggressive, yeah. I mean, there was something like 13, 14 different books coming out over a period of 1 or 2 years. And I think 7 or 8 of them have come out so far, which leaves just under half of them to come, I think.
And if I'm not mistaken, did they do a second Kickstarter for a different part of the setting as well?
Yeah, so I don't know how you pronounce it. Khitai, Khitai,
right.
Something like that. That Kickstarter, it did about 200,000, I believe, just off the top of my head. So not nearly as well as the original. And I wonder if that had anything to do with this. I don't know. He also did a board game one.
That's true,
earlier this year, and that one got cancelled part way through because that wasn't performing as expected either. So I'm not privy to any behind the scenes information, just what's been announced on Kickstarter itself. But yeah, sad times for all those people that have that were employed, all those freelancers that were lined up and stuff like that. So it's always sad when this sort of thing happens. If you recall, Evil Hat announced something similar last month. Evil Hat Productions announced that they were sort of like cancelling a lot of lines in 2019 after sort of going over their finances and things. So I don't know what this means in terms of the broader industry, if it means anything at all, or whether they're just two anomalies or what. I don't know, because we all know that D&D is getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger by the day.
Yep, that's very true.
I can't tell. I haven't got any insight into that. But it's bad news for a couple of companies there.
No, sad times.
Yeah, it's really disappointing to hear because honestly, you're saying D&D is obviously doing better and better, and I think I don't want to say that a rising tide lifts all ships, but I think that's kind of the case that everyone.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think the better D&D does, the better it does for everybody else.
Russ, was there any more news?
There was a bit more news. There was some Pathfinder news.
Pathfinder news. Oh yeah,
Pathfinder
news. Yeah,
Pathfinder 2 news to be precise. Ooh. So there has been another Pathfinder 2 playtest update. Let's have a look. The rules update this time has changed a lot of the major classes in the playtest. I won't go into all the details because there's quite a lot of changes here, but
Okay.
Are you familiar with the resonance mechanic from Pathfinder 2?
Can't say that I am.
This is a mechanic where basically you have a sort of pool of points that you can use in order to activate magic items. Which has been a little bit controversial. Some people like it, some people don't. And I think it's gone through a couple of different iterations throughout the playtest as well. But I haven't been following it closely enough to say for sure. Alchemists, who obviously are quite a sort of activating magic item type class, no longer use resonance, is one of the big changes they've got. Barbarians have a big change for their rage mechanic. So before there was a static number of rounds of rage.
Right.
Now they have to roll a flat check to stay angry each round.
Every round.
Your face
I
looks
see.
bemused.
The stay angry check.
Let's have a look.
That's
So,
how being angry works.
bards, clerics, and druids all have some sort of minor tweaks. Fighters and monks, not an awful lot. Paladins are finally coming away from their strict lawful good restriction, opening up to other good alignments. It says here they keep most of their kit with some variations to name and flavour based on the new alignment. Rangers got some simplification. Sorcerers have access now to a feat which heightens all their bloodline spells. And wizards now get access to a baked-in quick preparation feat and the ability to change out low-level spell slots for high-level spells.
Good to know.
Yeah. The playtest must be coming to an end soon, I would have thought. This is update 1.6, and I'm not sure how many there's going to be, but I think they're at the end of the final chapter of the Doomsday Dawn playtest adventures.
Fair enough. Any other news?
It's this, Mike Myler does his epic monsters and mythological figures column over on EN World.
Oh yeah,
So he's covered Dracula and Achilles and all
Historical and
sorts of
mythological.
historical figures, loads and loads of them, and he does one a week. And occasionally he drops in an epic monster instead, so he might do Cthulhu or he might do something like that. He's dropped in the Drop Bear this week.
That big Australian mammal.
That Australian legend.
No, my friend.
Vicious creature.
I was walking through the rainforest in the Blue Mountain. I was in fear. And they're a close relative to koala, surprisingly quick. You think they'd be like they'd move like a sloth, but no, they actually race along quite quickly. It's like oh, scary.
Yeah, but for those listeners who don't know, sort of Drop Bears are something of an in joke with Australians, and I think also Penny Arcade mentioned them in their webcomic once.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely worth checking out.
Well, I feel you're underestimating the drop bear menace throughout time. I am disappointed, but not surprised.
Yeah, I am never going to Australia. Not with those things around.
It's not like everything's trying to kill you. I think some of the smaller birds might only think about trying to kill you rather than actively trying to do so.
It's the spiders. The spiders I can't handle. Oh.
It's legit.
No way could I have to check my shoes for spiders in the morning. No way.
I'm sure you get used to it over time.
Shuddering already.
We got to change the subject, guys.
Good to know.
Shall we move on?
Yes, let's.
Shall we play our favourite game in all the world?
Our favourite game in all the world ever. Oh, yes.
So, Rodney, do you know what our favourite game in all the world ever is?
I believe I've gotten some sneak previews of it, but why don't you explain it to those who are not in the know?
So, our favourite game in the world ever is where I read out the name of a Kickstarter, and then you try and guess what that Kickstarter is based on just the name.
Okay.
It's highly scientific. There's a
very,
very, very complex scoring system which involves spreadsheets, algorithms, formula, stuff like that. It's
sounds like number wang.
It's a lot.
So what I reckon, should I give you two each? There's two of you, rather than
Sure.
Yeah, go
I
on,
usually
then.
give Peter 3 or 4. So if we split them between you.
Sounds great.
So we'll start with Peter, so Rodney can sort of see how it works.
Love it.
So we'll skip past spectaculars for the moment because we all know what that is, and we're going to talk about that in great detail later. All right then, Peter. What is the Dreams in Gary's Basement?
Apart from hilarious, the dreams in Gary's
The
basement.
Dreams in Gary's Basement.
So it sounds like it's a modern day setting, and we're looking at some guy a millennial, potentially, who's living in the basement. And, oh wait, is this about Gary Gygax? Gary Gygax? It might well be. Actually, that sounds interesting. So is it a Kickstarter for some sort of, like, historical game? It's like sort of a little, like a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like sort of a semi-biography or like a mini history about role-playing games. It's setting off with, I guess, about Dungeons and Dragons, based off Gary Gygax.
Not bad, not bad. I'll give you 7 out of 10 for that.
Woohoo!
So, yes, you are correct. It is about Gary Gygax.
Yep.
It's not a game, though. It's a documentary.
That is what I just said, Russ.
I thought you said it was a game.
I started off saying it was a game, and then I took a sharp right turn into
okay, fair enough. In that case, instead of 7 out of 10, I'll give you 6 out of 10. Well done.
Ooh. Harsh referee.
Judge's decision is final, arbitrary, and not constrained by Euclidean space.
So this is a documentary looking at Gary's life from his time as a down-on-his-luck shoe repairman to building a multi-million-dollar company that spawned our hobby. So you can get that over on Kickstarter. Rodney, are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
Are you ready? Okay,
Sure.
then. Okay, this is a good one. What is Nighty Nights? I'll spell it for you.
I think I know what it is. Is it cheating if I know what it is?
Slightly, yeah.
Go with it.
If I'm not mistaken, I think it is a role-playing game. I'm going to say it's probably powered by the apocalypse because damn near everything is powered by the apocalypse these days.
Even my car is powered by the apocalypse.
Yeah, basically, right. So I think it's a powered by the apocalypse game. Man, if I'm not mistaken, it's like Threadbare, I think was the other one, where it's basically like you play stuffed animals or something like that, where you're basically like, I don't know, protecting some kid's dreams or something like that. I don't know. I feel like I saw this one, but it reminded me of...
You got that one spot on.
Yeah.
So, Nighty Night, spelt Nightyghty.
Oh,
Clever.
well.
Peter looks impressed.
I'm very impressed.
It's Tiny D6, not a powered by apocalypse. But apart from that, you play stuffed animals, dolls, and action figures, defending your sleeping human children from monsters and nightmares.
An excellent title, I thought.
No, it's amazing. Yeah,
that actually sounds really cool. I really do like the sound. Last week we had one which was Dinosaur Princesses, which everybody loved the sound of.
Yes.
Dinosaurs which are princesses, not princesses riding dinosaurs.
Yeah,
this week,
that'd be princesses riding dinosaurs.
I think. I keep on finding these kind of quirky, kind of sort of oriented towards Kickstarters that look so amazing that I can't help but back them.
Honestly, like the fastest way to get me to back your Kickstarter is to have a title where I'm just like, damn it, I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah.
And this is one of those.
This guy gets it.
Yeah.
This guy gets it. This guy knows exactly.
Oh yeah, so Rodney gets a solid 12 out of 10 for that.
Ooh.
Hey, good work, bro.
That's twice your score, Peter. You are lagging behind. you look like
you can't see the galaxy truck over the camera.
You look like you don't care.
Bingo.
Okay, are you ready, Peter, for your next one?
Yes.
See if you can improve on your 6 out of 10. No. Are you ready?
Let's do it anyway.
What is Die Laughing?
Die Laughing.
Die Laughing.
Die Laughing. It sounds like an interesting cross of comedy and horror. Or it could be about rolling a polyhedra, which when you do, it cackles maniacally when you roll it. That would also be quite fun as well. There would be a laughing die, which is a die laughing.
I got it before you finished the sentence, yeah. It's a good joke,
it's fine.
Peter. It's good,
I'm glad you liked it. I guess it's a rules light system in order to let you do comedy horror improv games.
Spot on.
Nice.
100%. I don't want to give you 10 out of 10. I just don't want to do it, but I feel like I kind of have to because you've nailed it.
Give me 11 out of 11 because it's a Spinal Tap.
11 out of 11. All right.
There we
go. Up to 11. So Die Laughing, a short play, GM-less tabletop role-playing game where you portray characters in a horror comedy movie. The shtick on this one is everybody is going to die. It's just a matter of when and how funny you can make it.
That sounds like many a game called.
That does sound pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
It says it requires just a
quicker.
couple of minutes of prep to play. You pick your characters, make a few quick choices, you pick a monster, and you're ready to go. And it only takes like 1 to 2 hours to play, depending on how many players are involved.
Like Fiasco, but a lot more horror themed.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Amazing.
Yeah,
Well,
that does sound good.
It's
Okay.
actually German for the laughing. It's a German game.
Yeah. Oh well, I thought it was just Peter making the bad puns, but no. He's going to join in.
No. You know what you signed up for when you invited me.
yeah. I like you, Rodney. You should come on the show more often.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've got 2 here to choose from for you, Rodney. I don't know which one to go with. Shall we go with Bastion?
Bastion. Okay.
Bastion.
Let's see here. I don't know what this one is.
If you don't know what it is, I'm going to be amazed if you get it.
Let's see here. Bastion. Okay. I'm going to go with... It's a supplement for D&D that is about building fortresses. Yeah, that's my guess. Supplement for D&D about building fortresses.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I didn't think that was it.
It's not that. It's not even close to that. It's to be fair, that was a difficult one, but I think you've scored something like minus 10 points out of 10 there.
Perfect. It makes perfect sense.
Only minus 10. That's a big cause for celebration.
Which I think actually
frankly
puts
could have
Peter
been
in the
worse.
lead. I think it's the first time Peter's ever won this game.
Congratulations, sir.
No, Russ. I think I can definitely say in this game there are only losers.
So Bastion is an Afrocentric sword and sorcery fantasy game. So full colour, hardcover, 100-page sourcebook, uses the Mythic D6 system, and it's set in the last city at the edge of Oblivion, a post-apocalyptic game where heroes explore the wasteland to find survivors of the last great global holocaust.
Wow.
It sounds cool.
It does sound cool. There's some lovely art as well. Some of the art on this is beautiful.
I would not have got that from Bastion. I'll be honest.
Well, no, it makes sense, right? It's like the last bastion of civilization.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
I just completely whiffed.
So it's not set in Earth, I don't think. It says you take the role of the Hankra, the greatest warriors to ever walk the dying land of Aif Udai. I probably pronounced them really badly, but
super badly. It's okay. It's part of our shtick.
I pronounce most things
that.
really badly, so it's it's not surprising. Okay, well that is it for our favourite game in all the world this week. I think we could declare Peter a surprising winner.
Hey!
Congratulations, Peter.
Yeah,
okay.
congratulations.
I think we need to apply some sort of time zone modifier to this because, I think making anyone play this game at any time is obviously a crime against the Geneva Convention. But making them do that,
especially at 7 o'clock
before they finish their first cup of coffee, I mean, come on, Russ, what sort of monster are you?
It's okay. I'm on my 3rd cup. It should be fair by now, right?
Oh, in which case, I've no sympathy for you. Come on.
Right.
Get it together, man. Get it together. No. Thank you for calling the Adventurer Support Line. This call may be recorded for quality assurance purposes. How may I help you today?
Well, it's a bit of an odd one, this. Bit of a problem.
No problem, sir. I'm sure we can help you with that. What seems to be the issue?
Well, we were, adventuring and stuff, like you do.
As you say, sir. Like you do.
Yeah, and we were on the 16th level of the Orange Caverns of the Zendorificatus.
Bless you.
Thank you. Anyway, we were closing in on the Lost Tabernacle of Groot the Elder.
I think I know where this is going. This is the 4th call I've had about this today.
Well, like I say, we were just doing our stuff, our regular day-to-day adventuring stuff, when we all suddenly kind of changed.
Changed? How do you mean?
We must have been cursed, or enchanted, or set off some kind of transmutation trap or something.
Could you list some of the changes you've experienced?
Well, for a start, our thief, Madeline, started getting all pretentious and calling herself a rogue instead.
Ah, yes, yeah.
And our mage put on a pointy hat and declared he was now a wizard.
Yeah, right. I see what's happening, yeah.
And our cleric, he started talking about domains and channeling divinity and stuff.
Did any of you get stronger or brighter all of a sudden?
Yeah, Everyone seems to be suddenly Olympian world record breakers in their primary capability. Our fighter is now strong enough to bend steel bars, and our wizard just created a new theory of relativity off the top of his head.
Is that all?
No! The worst part is the fighter suddenly changed into some kind of dragon man, and the rogue has grown horns.
Yeah, right, I think I see what the problem is. It's quite simple, really. Your DM has changed edition.
Edition?
Yeah, that's from the sounds of it, you were playing something like original 2nd Ed D&D with rolled ability scores. Now you're playing D&D 5th Ed with point buy, which is why your character classes have changed. Your fighter is now a Dragonborn, and your rogue is now a Tiefling.
Is this a common problem?
Yeah, perfect, common. Don't worry about it. You'll notice that you'll have 20 in your primary ability now. That's the point buy. Nice little boost there.
Oh, yes, very nice. Well, thank you for your help. I feel so much better now.
No problem. Thank you for calling the Adventurer Helpline. Don't forget to complete the survey after the call.
You know what I think we should do now? I think we should talk about Rodney.
Wow.
Do we have to?
Not with Rodney. Let's just talk about him.
About me.
Yeah.
You know
Rodney,
that Rodney
mute your
guy.
microphone.
Never liked that Rodney guy. I mean,
What a jerk.
he's got a suspicious face. He has. Yeah. So, Rodney. So, for those who don't know who you are probably best known for working on Star Wars SAGA Edition and on D&D 5th Edition.
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. Yeah, I spent about a little bit less than a decade at Wizards of the Coast and got to work on a lot of different awesome projects like Star Wars and D&D and board games and role-playing games and card games and all kinds of things.
Yeah, so the first time I came aware of you, I think it must have been coming up to 20 years ago now, when you used to, do you still have anything to do with it? The Star Wars RPG network.
I still have the site.
You still run it, do you?
I don't actively run it. I haven't actively run it since I started working at Wizards in 2007.
Right.
But I still pay for the hosting and everything.
So back then, I think that was probably because there was Eric Noah's site was around for D&D 3rd Edition at the time, and I reckon yours was probably the equivalent for the Star Wars RPG at the time.
I think so, yeah. Because I was in college at the time, and I had a lot of free time, obviously, like I said earlier, and was able to keep up with the news, because after 3rd Edition D&D came out, the first iteration of D20 Star Wars wasn't far on its heels. And actually, when I started the site originally, or the previous iteration of the site, it was kind of at the tail end of the West End Games era, the whole, that whole product line ending and everything. So there was a lot of people who were already big Star Wars RPG fans that were very, let's say, trepidatious about the release of a D20 Star Wars game. And so, I kind of got in on that ground floor, and talking about how long ago we sort of became aware of each other. I can tell you that I know this much. My site was nominated for the very first ENnie Awards, which was, the ceremony was held online.
Yes,
I remember that.
Gary
I remember that I was at my girlfriend's house.
Hosted,
Yeah, I was at my girlfriend's house, and I was like, hang on, I gotta go log into a chat room for a couple hours. And she was just like, what? And so I remember sitting in her family office on her computer, in the chat room for that first ENnie Awards, which was, 99? 98? 2000? I don't know, whenever that was.
No, that would have been, it must have been 2001, I think. It must have been.
Was it that late? Okay.
I think it was 2001, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember I was still in college, so...
So you then, of course, ended up working on the Star Wars SAGA system itself, which I guess must have been quite a dream come true, given the fact that you were such a big fan of the system.
It was. Actually, I'd been doing I'd been doing the site for a while, and I had a pretty good relationship with people who worked at Wizards. I had already developed a relationship with J.D. Weicker and Chris Perkins, and because they were working on the Star Wars line, and they would do interviews with me and things, right? So I had a good relationship with them, and it was actually really interesting. I was in college, and I was coming close to the end of the semester, and I was looking at the next semester of school, and I didn't know how I was going to pay for college, because my parents were helping me some, but I didn't.
A lot of money.
Yeah. I didn't have, and I didn't have a lot of savings or anything, and so I was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this. And while I was struggling for that, I got the call from Chris Perkins, and he was like, "Hey, we've seen that you've been putting out a lot of material for the Star Wars RPG. Do you want to, contribute to a book?" So like he basically was taking a chance that like, hey, this person who's putting out a lot of material, because I was putting out content on like a daily basis. He took a chance on me, and it ended up helping me pay for my next semester of college.
Wow.
And then after, you write a book for Wizards, it suddenly becomes a lot easier to like broach the topic of freelancing with other companies. Because you can say like, hey, I wrote this book for Wizards. Do you have any work or whatever? And so that following, so like that was in like October-ish of 2000, I think. And so then at that point, I went to Gen Con that next year, and I was able to go around to a bunch of different companies. And this was right at the start of the D20 boom, right? And I was like, hey, can you, can I get some work with you? And so I made contacts at Green Ronin and Paizo and all these other companies that eventually became big parts of the D20 boom. And I was able to pay my way through the rest of college by freelancing, right? Because like I basically, like I had school during the day, I had a night job, and then I had the after my night job freelancing that I was doing, and it was enough to help me pay my tuition. So yeah, it was a pivotal moment, obviously, in my life.
Yeah. Were you living in Seattle at the time? Or?
No. This was in Knoxville, Tennessee. Right. I grew up in Tennessee, which is far, far away from here, and I was in college. Knoxville's about 2 hours from my hometown of Chattanooga. So I was living there at the time, and I didn't move to Seattle until I was hired by Wizards to come run the Star Wars line.
So after that, obviously, you later worked on D&D 5th edition.
I did, yes.
Which I imagine must be an intense and, it's a big project, that, launching a new edition of D&D.
It was a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. Were you surprised about how successful it turned out to be? Did you have any idea at the time?
I mean, surprised, probably no. Extremely happy, yes.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, the thing is, like, D&D had gone through like a weird period in like the 4th edition era, and I wasn't really a part of that as much. Like I worked on some of the later source books, but while they were developing 4th edition D&D, I was working on the Star Wars product line. Yeah. And like I was there for playtesting and stuff, but I didn't have a huge hand in it. And then by the time it came time to do 5th edition D&D, I was working full time on D&D at that point, right? Yeah. So basically, like I had gotten to see sort of secondhand like what was going on in the process for 4th edition, but 5th was the first time I'd really gotten to participate from the ground floor, right? We were in a position where the audience was pretty divided, and I think that the game was in a place that was just like, well, okay, we could go a lot of different ways with this, right? And when we started doing the open playtesting process, that was kind of the moment that I was like, okay, like this is going to lead us to something that is really exciting and it's going to be really great, but it's going to be a long, hard road to get there, because one of the things that we learned very early on is that the audience, even the audience that is enthusiastic about 5th edition D&D or any particular edition, will be very divided. Like, it's not just like across edition lines, it's within an edition, right? Like, and so, like,
I mean, that's the nature of fandom these days.
Yeah.
For anything, I think it's.
But the thing is, the audience was enthusiastic, right? They were just they had very different desires, right? And so the big challenge was always, how do we satisfy the desires of our player base without making something that's so generic it's just mush, right? And I think the big sort of, I don't want to say revelation, but the big turning point for us was when we were talking about the game and we were like, we should behave not like we are the creators of this game. We are the shepherds of this game, right? Like, this is a game that has 40 years of history. It has massive fandom that is a cultural touchstone to the point where, like, we're watching sitcoms and there are D&D references that are legitimate D&D references, not just like some writer that threw in like, oh, what's that nerd game? Okay, whatever. But like, or like watching that episode of Community where they're playing D&D, right?
Yeah, or Stranger Things or something like that.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
You know, this is a cultural touchstone, and we need to shepherd this game and make sure that it is doing what it is supposed to do, doing what D&D is supposed to do in the best way possible, right? And like once we kind of, you know, adopted that mindset and then started working with like the feedback we were getting from the audience, I knew we were on the right track. Like I felt very confident in that. And that, I mean, like there were still tons of struggles, right? Like there were, you know, long arguments there. I mean, there's obviously things in the game even today that things I didn't get my way on that I'm just like, I would change that, right? but that's the other thing too, is like we had an amazing team of extremely talented people who are working on it, right? So between like audience participation and being on like a role-playing game all-star team, right? Like I felt very confident at the time. And when the game finally released and started getting out there into the wild and seeing the generally positive reaction, I mean, it wasn't universal, right? But generally positive reaction, I was like, okay, this is going to do fine. And then that combined with like the different product strategy, which we had talked about at the time. I mean, I was mostly focused on the design stuff, but like we talked about the product strategy. And like, even at the time, I was like, yes, this is the way that we should be doing things, right? Like I felt good about that direction. And so it's been really gratifying for me to see how it's paid off, even though like I've been gone for 3.5 years now, right? Like I was there through launch, right? And through some of the post-launch supplements, right? But like now, even being a few years removed, I'm very proud of the game. I think the work that the team did was amazing. And I think that, you know, D&D is in a really great place. So that's my super long-winded way of saying, like, no, I'm not surprised. I'm just very pleased that my instincts were correct.
Cool. Is there anything in 5th edition that you would say is yours? You know,
I mean,
could we point to something and say that's Rodney? That is.
I don't know. Like everybody kind of touched everything. Oh, what can they blame me for? Like, anything you want. Anything you want. No, you know, like everything was touched by everybody, and that's the thing is like there's no one thing that I can be like, oh, I know that thing, because like there are classes in the game that I did the mechanical design like first pass on, but then like Peter Lee and Jeremy Crawford and Rob Schwab would come behind me and then tinker and tweak and modify or like flip it around, right? Like a good example is I remember Rob Schwab designed a bunch of the like first pass mechanics on some spells. And then like there was like a month where every day me and Peter and Jeremy were in a conference room, like projecting everything up on the screen and just going through every spell line by line, like, oh, we need to change this, tweak this, whatever, right? So it was a collaborative process from like beginning to end. There are elements of the game that I could say like, yes, I was part of like a core group of people that were responsible for that. Like, I think the closest I can say is that me and Peter and Rob did a lot of the underlying math behind the game. And it's obviously like, because you can't predict what's going to happen at any given game table. Like you can only go so far, but like we did a lot of that underlying math. And then like Jeremy, there is actually a funny story. There was a snow day, and it snows pretty rarely in Seattle. Like despite the fact that we're far north and everything, like we actually don't get a lot of snow here, right? But we had a snow day, one of our rare snow days, and it was bad enough that we were actually snowed in for like 3 or 4 days. And me and Jeremy Crawford and Tom Lapilli, who was still at Wizards at the time, we basically got on, I think it was Google Hangouts, and we basically had a like 2-day long design session just like on Google Hangouts where we wrote like the first draft of the core like resolution system, like the basic, skill checks and attacks and combat and all that stuff, right? And a lot of that actually basically survived, other than editing, largely unscathed through the process, right? Now, part of that's because like we really we tried to basically say what is the simplest we can possibly get with this, right? Yep. So there wasn't a lot of drift there, but over the course of like a 2-day snow day, we carved out a lot of what became the core rules. But like I say, like I can't take credit for a single thing because everything was touched by a huge number of people.
I think it's fairly safe to say you guys knocked it out of the park because, it is so popular now. I mean, the growth has been explosive. I think it's been D&D's grown 30% year on year for the last 4 years. I think was the
I'm
latest
not
stuff
surprised.
to come out. It's enormous.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I think obviously the advent of streaming and stuff like that helped, and things like Critical Role and all that sort of stuff. But that became big after you started designing D&D, didn't it? I mean, back then I don't think streaming was such a big thing. Was it in your minds at all at the time? Did you have any idea that you were designing a rule set which? Because I think it's a very good rule set for streaming, whereas a slightly more complex rule set, a sort of more heavy rule set might be a little more difficult or cumbersome to stream just because of the nature of the medium.
Yeah, it really wasn't in our minds that much because streaming was so nascent at the time, and not just for role-playing games, but for video games even, right? Like Twitch was still young and hadn't quite reached the popularity that it is at now, obviously. I remember during the playtest process, we did a couple of live streams. Greg Bilsland was pushing us pretty hard to do a lot of live streams. And so I remember a 5th edition conversion of Chris Perkins' adventure, Lich Queen's Beloved from Dungeon 100, right? And that was one of the first live streams we did at Wizards. And then we did a few more of those, but like we had no idea that it was going to be a big thing. And of course, this was way before like Critical Role or any of like the big modern streams, right? So it wasn't really in our head. I'm not sure we would have made that many decisions that were different from what we actually did, partially because, like I said before, we were so guided by the audience feedback, right? And I think like while streaming has been an amazing boon for D&D, I'm not certain that the majority of the players out there are I can say almost for certain the majority of players out there are not streamers. No. And I think that by looking at sort of like what our audience was guiding us towards, it would have still guided us in the direction that we went. Yeah. Maybe we would have made a few decisions slightly differently, but I doubt it would be that different from what we ended up with.
Fair enough.
Sounds good.
So let's get on to talking about your current stuff then, shall we? Because you left Wizards about 3 years ago. Went to work at Bungie, is it?
That's right.
A video games company. Working on a few video games. I'm not a big video game player, unfortunately, so I don't know an awful lot about
Bungie
stuff,
quite.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Fairly important. Yeah.
So, what was that? Just more money, was it, or was that more sort of what you wanted to do, or
different challenges?
The thing is, like, you get to work on an edition of D&D, and you look around, and you're like, oh, what do I do next, right? And the thing is, like, at the time, like, I had a big success with Lords of Waterdeep. Like, it was a, excuse me, it was a collaborative effort.
It was all me.
It was definitely not.
And D&D, and Star Wars, everything was me.
It was absolutely not. Let me make that 100% clear. But, I'd gotten to participate in something that was very successful, right? Like Lords of Waterdeep had become a really big hit already. Yeah. We'd already done the digital translation of the game, which was a big hit as well. So, I'd gotten to work on a big hit board game. And then I worked on D&D 5th edition, and that was, very successful, right? So I got to help design an edition of D&D, which is on the bucket list of just about any game designer, I would imagine, right? And so I'm looking around and I'm like, okay, well, what do I do next? And I happen to be teaching myself Unity, which I just, like, we had a lull in the post 5th edition release. I was teaching myself Unity. I was coding my own little games, and I had the fortune to go visit Bungie as a part of a talk that we gave on the design of 5th edition. Like, it was an IGDA talk, and we had gone there, and I really liked the studio, and I just happened to be, like, looking at the, like, careers page. I was like, this job kind of sounds like a thing that I could do. And honestly, like, when I applied for the job, I was like, I don't think I have a snowball's chance in hell of getting this job, but I'll give it a try anyways. And then it turns out that they wanted somebody with my particular skill set.
Yeah, and having worked on D&D is probably a great sort of little...
Yeah. And you know, like, I work on Destiny, which is an ongoing, like, live service game. And so they were like, well, what if we had someone who was like a professional dungeon master working here, right? So I was very fortunate that at the time that I was sort of looking to try new things, they were also looking to add new skill sets to their repertoire. And even, like, you know, when I went through the interview process, I got the job, and once I started the job, even then, like, at the very beginning, I was like, oh man, can I do this job? I mean, I've been in tabletop games for, at that point, you know, over 15 years.
Yeah.
Like, can I do this? And it turns out that a lot of game design is kind of platform agnostic, right? And so once I learned the new tools, and I'm very fortunate that I have a minor in computer science, so I already had some basic programming knowledge, and I've been teaching myself Unity, so the technical hurdles weren't quite as high. So I'm very fortunate that when I got there, they were basically like, yeah, we know you've been in tabletop games, so we're going to help you a little bit, but then also, like, a lot of my skills immediately applied.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, within about 6 months, I was firing on all cylinders again as a game designer. So, and then ever since then, it's been, you know, like, I love it, and I'm doing interesting game design things in a totally different medium than I did for the previous, you know, 15 years.
Yeah. And of course, you kept your hand in the tabletop design business, of course. So last year, Dusk City Outlaws, I backed that Kickstarter. I have it sitting right there. What I really like about Dusk City Outlaws, and it looks like your current one, Spectaculars, is more of the same, is you brought back the whole boxed set idea. The production values of that thing were lovely. I mean, I'm always a sucker for production values and stuff anyway, and as I suspect that many people are. And box sets definitely is something I've always loved. Yeah, Dust City Outlaws. Sadly, I haven't had a chance to play it.
Oh no!
I mean, I've got it. I've read it. I know how to play it, but I haven't actually had opportunity to play it. I've really got to sort of find some. If I make it to Gen Con, maybe next year or the year after, and you're there, we have to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. You know, and I designed it so that, like, you can play it on a moment's notice.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. That's what I love about it. I mean, there's a ethos that you've used there and you've used in Spectaculars, which basically is zero preparation, pretty much. You can just
that's what I'm aiming at. And part of that's just purely selfish, honestly, because, you know, I have a day job and then a side job and, like I said, a toddler, right? So I don't have a ton of time in general. Yeah. So, like, trying to make a game for, you know, game nights when we don't have a plan, or where it's like, oh, like, normally we would play a board game. The thing is, like, I love board games, but then sometimes I just want to play an RPG, right?
Yeah, of course.
And if no one's done the prep work,
it's a different thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a board game, it's okay, but there's just something about being at an RPG table. You've got your friends around, and it's just like it's the interactive element, I think, of an RPG that really makes it stand out. That really grabs you in a way.
Absolutely.
That board games, they're fine, but there's always that element of people just sitting around. It's like when you're playing an RPG, you come together as a group in a way that I think very few other things give you the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I kind of got my start in gaming with RPGs, and I didn't really play board games until I moved out to Seattle, right? So my first love is RPGs. So I'm always looking for more ways to get more RPGs on the table.
Yeah, I'm much the same. I mean, I'm not a big board gamer at all, which basically means that, you know, I played your Lords of Waterdeep game, which is one of the very few board games I've played in the last sort of 15 years. Because I'm not really, you know, if I've got a choice, I'll RPG always. I love Lords of Waterdeep because I found I tend to find with a board game when someone's, I can't stand that bit where someone who knows the board game explains the rules to you and basically starts halfway through. Do you know what I mean? And you know, I think explaining the rules of a board game to someone who doesn't know how to play that board game is an art.
Oh, absolutely! I completely agree.
And when people start, so you want to play this card and this card, you didn't even tell me the goal of the game yet. I mean, you know, it's. I hate that. But I found that Waterdeep, and I'm sure other games do this, but I'm not a big experienced board gamer. Lords of Waterdeep kind of had this sort of ramp that I found it quite easy to play because it was quite simple to play at first, and then I kind of by the time it got to the end of the game, I knew how to play the game, but not in the sense that I'd gotten halfway through, then I realised how to play the game, then I think, I just want to start again now. Do you know what I mean? Like some games,
right?
But with Lords of the Waterdeep, I didn't have that experience, so it kind of ramped me up in a way.
That was a very intentional design. Peter and I, when we were working on the game, the initial design, we had said the key to a game, and we were aiming at play this game in an hour, right? So we had a very clear playtime target. But the key to a satisfying experience is basically letting people make interesting, clever decisions, like feeling clever. But the thing is, if it's your first time playing, it's really hard to feel clever if it's throwing a lot at you. So we basically, we looked at our game, we're like, okay, we're going to start with the simplest possible complexity that is functional, right? And then by the end, we want to get to about this level of complexity. How do we sort of chop it up and layer those things in? And so, the way that buildings come out in the game is one of those key ways. But then, everything about, the design was about that ramping up of complexity. And the thing is, I think the reason that we were so successful is that it ramps up to a point of complexity that, there's a lot on the board, but it all still boils down to, you can take one agent, put it on the board, take one action, get your resources, bring, cash in. It's still the same base functionality of the game. So that you reach the end of the game, you finish, and you can sort of look at it and say okay, I wish I'd done this differently, but it's not so far out of your grasp, and most people want to come back and play again because they're I get it now. I think I could do a better job if we played it again.
But in that first go, you're not going to do so badly compared to other people that know the game that you're discouraged, which is something I find is definitely a thing when playing with people who are experienced at a game and. Right. Either they're going to be holding back, in which case they're not having as much fun, or you're just going to get trounced. But anyway, so Spectaculars.
Yeah.
So you've let me had a quick look at the it's a quick play of it. Was it? It was an It wasn't the full thing, was it? But there was
no. It's the print and play.
It's a bit like the Spectaculars, a little bit like the Incredibles, in that you're a superhero team coming together. Yeah. And the thing I thought was particularly attractive about it again was that sort of. It's a game for people with busy lives. Very minimal prep, get it going, and you're superheroes. Let's do it. Is that fair, Rodney?
I think so. The big thing was you were talking about Dusk City Outlaws earlier, and it being wanting to get on the table quickly. With Spectaculars, I was okay, Dusk City Outlaws, great for one shots getting on the table very quickly, but I want to try and tackle campaign play, right, as the main goal, right? And I want to tackle world building because I think there's a lot of people out there that want to play long running campaigns and they want to do their own world building, but they don't have time for it because they're busy adults or they're in school or whatever, right? And the thing is, it's such a satisfying experience when you run a great campaign or when you build your own world. I was what if I applied sort of the theory behind Dusk City Outlaws of using physical components in the design of the game to make that something that everybody can experience, that even a busy person can experience. So when I sort of give the elevator pitch for Spectaculars, I'm it's a superhero role-playing game. You're going to create your own heroes and villains and everything. A lot of superhero RPGs do that, right? But for this game, the big thing about it is it doesn't come with a setting. You're going to build your own setting, and you're going to, from the ground up, create your own comic book universe, right? And then you're going to play through campaigns, and it's going to come with campaigns that require you to do zero prep work. You're just going to open it up and start playing through this campaign, and you can change game masters, session to session. People can play different characters or whatever. It's going to be a no prep campaign play world building game.
I mean, that's a big promise you're making there, Rodney. Zero prep campaign play.
The thing is, I took a lot of inspiration. I sort of looked around at different games that do this well, and one of them that kept coming up was Pandemic Legacy. And I don't know if you guys have played Pandemic Legacy, but it's a board game that has a campaign to it, right? The world changes, your copy of the game changes and everything. So basically, I looked at Pandemic Legacy and I was okay, how does it pull this off? And I took a lot of lessons from that game as well. So it is a tall order to say it's campaign play without any prep work, but physical components make it a lot easier too, because I can basically say okay, you're gonna have this pad that you like a tear off sheet pad that every sheet's going to be different, and you're going to play down through it, and that's like your campaign. And so like it keeps you from feeling like you have to read ahead and prepare and this and that, right? And every issue self-contained. And this is one of the reasons why I picked the superhero genre, because it's very episodic and very self-contained. It's a combination of a lot of different elements.
So this stage of the game where you build the setting. So how does that work? So I've seen bits and pieces of it where you basically have a page with a number of check boxes, sort of saying that your villain's base is located in and then you checkbox a thing and stuff like that. So how does all that work? Is that like a sort of pre-session, a session zero type thing, collaborative thing with the players?
Kind of. So basically, the way it's going to work is you have to imagine sort of what the final product is going to look like. You're going to open up this box set, and it's going to have in there a sort of big square book, like a board game rule book, that is the setting book, right? And that's your setting book. When you open it up, like the first couple of pages are going to be the basics of your setting. So right before you start playing, you're going to go through, and as a group, you're going to collaboratively answer a bunch of questions, right? And these are multiple choice questions. And this is actually some inspiration I kind of took from the Powered by the Apocalypse games. And I basically said, like, okay, you're going to answer these multiple choice questions that are going to shape the basics of your setting. Now, that's like the first 2-ish pages of the book, right? And it's going to be a 60-page book, right? All the other pages each page is dedicated to another major setting element. So something like, what is your setting's super science lab, or the prison they send supervillains to, or your alternate dimension, or whatever. Like all these things that are big, iconic tropes of the comic book genre, right? Things you would find in Marvel Comics, and DC Comics, and Image Comics, all these different superhero things, right? And then, as you're playing through the campaigns, periodically, it will reference one of those pages, right? Like, this person works for the Super Science Lab. And it'll reference that page, and every time you see a reference to one of the setting elements, you sort of open up the book, you look at it, and if you haven't filled out that section yet, you do it right then, right? And so basically, you create all these different elements of your setting at the moment that you need them, and then after that point, if something references, you already have it ready to go. And so basically, over time, you kind of fill in all the blanks in your setting and create this setting collaboratively as you need it.
So this happens during play sometimes rather than before play.
You're creating your canon as you go.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, a lot of times the scenarios will reference like, hey, here's the setting element, like right in the middle of the issue, right? So when you're playing through it, you basically pause and be like, we need to talk about our super prison. So what is our super prison like? And it's usually like 4-ish questions, right? So it takes a couple of minutes of discussion, and then boom, you're ready to go again, right?
I'm good to go. No, that sounds really good.
I'm really excited about it. I think that there's something super fun about like, we created this thing as a group, and then you build off of it, and you build off of it, and you build off of it. And I even have things in there like each hero can kind of progress over time the more you play them. When you create your hero's origin story, you tie it into one of your setting elements, you get a little bump on your progress track, right? So it's like, it reinforces this thing that you've already created.
So what's the overall sort of genre style? Because superheroes come in all sorts of different, from the gritty to the fantastic. What's the sort of aim of this one?
So general tone overall is largely aimed at sort of like, I would say like post-Silver Age, early Bronze Age, like everything from like late 60s to early 80s, like pre-Dark Age comics in general, right? With heavy inspiration from things like Darwin Cook's New Frontier or The Incredibles, basically like generally optimistic about heroes, but not afraid to tackle like difficult subjects, right? And by difficult subjects, I mean bad guys. Villains that do like real villainy, right? But that having been said, you kind of define like the genre by the choices you make as well. Within that, the game comes with 4 campaigns. So 4 series is what I call them. Each one of those has about 13 issues, which are the scenarios, right? So each of those 4 series is themed after a different genre of superheroes. Right. So, for example, one of the series is Explorers of the Unknown, and it's sort of themed after like super science, which is like Fantastic Four, Avengers, that kind of thing, right? Another one is Eldritch Mysteries, and that one's sort of magic and sorcery themed, which encompasses everything from like Doctor Strange all the way over to like Hellblazer, right? So it's, you know, it's kind of aiming at these different genres, but just like in Marvel and DC, you have drift between them to where like characters from one series show up in another one, right?
Yeah. How do you handle the fact that like superheroes have basically different power levels? Like you've got Hawkeye and you've got Thor, and one of these is the god of lightning, and the other guy drives the bus.
Right. Basically, I just fully flattened the power curve. Right. Like, you know, Hawkeye and Thor show up in the Avengers movie. They both have their own scenes. I kind of leave it up to the players to narrate their descriptions in a way that makes sense. Right. You know, the thing is, like, this is a collaborative superhero game where we're all on the same team. I didn't feel like I needed to basically like, okay, we got to make sure that everyone's at different power levels. That makes perfect sense. It's like, no, like you narrate this. You're coming up with the descriptions for what your hero is doing. If you want to be the street level guy and this person over here wants to be like crazy cosmic person, and you're both going to appear in the same series, it's just like if some writer was writing it into a comic book, which happens all the time, by the way, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like Ghost Rider is in space right now, so
why not?
Like, you know, yeah. So it's sort of up to the players to narrate those differences in a way that makes sense. But mechanically, it's pretty flattened, right?
Yeah, and the focus is really more on like the storytelling rather than like being really crunchy, which I suppose makes a lot of sense.
It's a little crunchier than Dusk City Outlaws was, because Dusk City Outlaws was very much about like this sort of narrative, planning your heist and stuff like that.
I love the planning phase in that. That's just I just love that element of a game, and just sort of the idea of seeing players there just planning together.
Right, exactly. But with Spectaculars, superheroes kind of demand a little more action and a little more conflict, right? A lot of what they're about is that conflict. So I definitely aimed the game a little bit more at the action side of things, and it's a little bit more tactical. Yeah. You have a little bit more tactical control over what your hero is doing, and it's a little bit more involved as far as like your decision making goes. But that having been said, in general, compared to a lot of superhero RPGs, it is a little bit lighter on the rule side, and the focus is more on like, can we create sort of interesting action scenes where I make decisions that have consequences without having to burn a lot of brain cells optimizing.
So you're about halfway through the Kickstarter now. Are you? Is it about 2 weeks left? A week left?
Actually, only a week left. So I'm three quarters of the way through.
You're going to do it. You're going to blast it. It's going to be fine. This is your second Kickstarter, and you're using the same base system, I think, is it, as Dusk City Outlaws?
Same dice mechanics. Let's put it that way.
How does that? How does that dice mechanic work?
Let me back up a little bit and explain where it came from. I really like the idea behind like Fantasy Flight's Star Wars game with the like whole bunch of funky dice, right? Like in general, I like the idea behind it, but it's more involved than what I wanted for my game, right? So I sort of looked at it and was like, okay, can I do something that creates like a spectrum of results and that creates interesting twists and turns without having to constantly sort of read the tea leaves every time you roll the dice, right? Because that's one of the things that I like about like D20 games is sometimes if I'm the DM in like D&D and I have no idea what to do, I'm just like, oh, whatever, roll some dice, right? And so I like that aspect of like the more pass-fail D20 style games, but I like the like sort of diversity of results that you get from a game like Fantasy Flight Star Wars or like Powered by the Apocalypse's sort of spectrum of results on the 2d6. And so I was like, okay, I want to create something like that, but I want to make it a dice system that when you look at it, it's easy to understand if you've never played an RPG before. And so I was like, okay, well, you know, one of the biggest things that I think is hard to communicate to people when they play D&D is like, how good are you at a thing, right? And because like if I see like, oh, whatever, +3, it's like, okay, what does that mean? It's like, well, you're rolling a d20, and the average on a d20 is actually 10.5. So if you've got a +3, it's 13.5 out of 20, which is and like it's a whole thing, right? Which eventually like people get it, but you know, the first time you see it, it's tricky. So I was like, okay, well, percentile systems don't necessarily have that problem because it's like, what's my chance of success here? 80%. well, I know, like, it's super instinctive what 80% means, right? So I was like, okay, like, percentile has that big advantage, but one of the tricky parts about a lot of percentile systems is like, oh, it's, you know, you have an 80% chance, but this thing gives you a plus 20% bonus. And it's like, what does that mean? Am I rolling under 100? Am I rolling, yeah. So
do I
was like,
also succeed? What's happening here? Yeah.
Right. So I basically took like the things I liked about a percentile system and the things I liked about like Fantasy Flight Star Wars or Warhammer or things like that. I was like, okay, I'm going to smoosh these together. Or Fate actually does this too, right? I was like, I'm going to smoosh these together, right? And so basically it's a dice system where you roll percentile dice for your success or failure, right? And every skill and every power has a percentage chance of success. So it's like, okay, I'm going to use my super strength, 80% chance of success, no matter what I'm doing. I always just have to roll under an 80 to succeed. Like, that number never changes.
Nice.
But then I have two other kinds of dice. I have advantage dice and I have challenge dice, which each have their own single symbol on them. So, like, another sort of difference between this and, like, Fantasy Flight Star Wars is that there's one symbol on the bad dice, one symbol on the good dice, and then there's, like, blank sides on those, right? And so basically for positive and negative circumstances surrounding the roll, you add advantage and challenge dice into the roll. And it's like, okay, well, you know, you're trying to blast that guy out of the sky, but he's really far away, so add a challenge die, but he doesn't know you're there, so add an advantage die, and also, like, you did some prep work in advance for this, so add another advantage die, and so you sort of take those and your percentile dice, roll them all at once, and what you get is basically a really fast interpretation of what happens. Because it's like, all right, did I succeed or fail? Look at the percentile dice. Do I have upside or downside? Look at the advantage and challenge dice.
Right.
And because I'm just looking at symbols, right? Like, oh, okay, like, yep, I've got two boons on my advantage dice. Great. So I know that I'm going to get 2 boons worth of extra upside on top of that. Then the nice part is it's really fast to adjudicate. It's really easy to sort of look at what I rolled and read it and be like, oh, yep, success with 2 boons. So that, like, super success basically, right? And it's like really fast to adjudicate, but then it also gives you that nice spectrum of possible results. And it's actually, I think, one of the reasons why Dusk City Outlaws and Spectaculars both are easier to play with no prep. Because a lot of times, if you're prepping for a game, you're thinking about like, oh, what are the interesting contingencies? Like, oh, what could possibly happen here that's interesting? What are the fun twists and turns? And with this dice system, you kind of wait until the players roll the dice, and then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, you succeed, but with a drawback. Okay, what would be an interesting, like, negative twist? Okay, boom, and you go from there, right? And so it's very in the moment improvisation, but it also sort of hits that goal in my mind of like, you know, sometimes you just want someone to roll dice to see what happens. And like, you don't have to add in advantage or challenge dice. Sometimes you're just like, yeah, throw your percentile dice and let's see what you get. And so I think it kind of hits that nice, like, middle ground between like diverse, interesting, results, like spectrum of results, and then like ease of use and interpretation, right?
I do like the idea of physically adding dice rather than modifiers.
Yeah.
I like the sort of tactile kind of. It's like the inspiration mechanic in D&D is also a bit like that as well.
Yeah.
Physically add an extra D20
Or advantage,
Advantage, disadvantage,
Yeah.
And also it makes it more accessible to people with dyscalculia, which is like a fairly significant problem. I mean, we've all played in games where there's been someone who, no matter how many times they roll a dice, they just can't add it up.
Right.
And that's not because they're necessarily bad at maths. They might be, but for a lot of people, actually having to do that kind of number crunch time over time is really stressful.
But yeah, just adding an extra dice rather than adding, doing some mental maths and sort of like adding or taking away a modifier. I love the concept of doing that. It's just tactile, easy, it's very simple, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very easy to see, like, at a glance, like, oh, I you know, this is a favorable circumstance for me, or an unfavorable circumstance, right? And just by, like, seeing what dice you have in your hand, it kind of gives you this vague sense of, like, oh, okay, like, I understand the situation around this roll.
So how many powers does a typical character have? Because that ranges very much in the comic books from just having arm falling off boy with his one power of having his arm fall off.
Right.
That is a real thing, by the way.
Picture with the song,
up to Superman, who's got like 10 powers. I mean, what's the sort of range we're talking for this?
So I would say in general, 1 to 3.
1 to 3, right.
So you have to have at least one. You can have up to 3. but there are times in the game when certain characters can get more. So, for example, I've got an archetype called the Sorcerer, right? And the Sorcerer obviously has lots of spells and everything, and so it'd be very easy to be like, you can use any power in the game. So what I did instead is like, okay, no, you've got 3 powers, just like anybody else, or up to 3 powers, just like anybody else. But if you spend these hero points, which is a resource you have, you can basically draw 3 more powers off the deck and swap out some of your powers. So it's like you're like changing the spells you've memorized in D&D, right? So there's a little flexibility there. And this is one of the places where like having physical components like cards really comes in handy because like my personal philosophy is that like if I look at like a random table and a deck of cards, I'm like, yep, the deck of cards is just like the better version of the random table in a lot of ways, right? It's not 100% true, but like having that deck of cards, I can just be like, yeah, draw some powers off there, right? Or the inventor archetype, basically they have an ability that says like, hey, take the top card of the deck of powers, turn it face up, and play with that card face up at all times. And at any time, you can basically spend a hero point to use that power. And then when you do, it cycles back down to the bottom of the deck, and you flip the next card up, right? And so basically, like, using the physical pieces that come with the game to enhance gameplay in a way that's like, oh, okay, like, I get what's happening here. I'm an inventor, so I'm constantly having, like, inspiration for new inventions without having to, like, craft some very complex mechanic out of it, right? So,
would you say that there's some of your board game influence in that? A traditional role-playing game will roll a dice and consult a table, whereas a board game will typically do the same thing by drawing a card or whatever. Would you say that you know you've been influenced a bit by board games in choosing those sort of elements?
I would say so, in that because board games require you to basically like, okay, you learn the rule set and you play by the rules, and there's no game master, there's no GM fiat, right? Board games have to be so tight that any kind of variation you're going to introduce has to like be a function of the physical components, right? Like that's just true about board games, right? Because like without a game master or a game master like player, like games like Mansions of Madness can have this kind of experience in a board game, but like the physical components.
You've got the app for it, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, the new version, yeah. But like the physical components are the only way that variety really gets introduced. So like looking at it and saying like, oh, this is a way that like a very rigid rule set is able to introduce variety. That plus the fact that like too many times we've been sitting down, I told you about my Tuesday game where we play new games all the time. Too many times we've sat down and be like, okay, let's play this game. Great. All right, we're going to make characters. Super. How many copies of the book do we have? 2. How many players do we have? 6.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's just hand this book around or whatever, right? Like the fact, like that I ran into that so many times, I was just like, okay, well, I never have this problem in a board game where it's just like, yep, I pass out the tiles or the cards or whatever to everybody. Like, kind of made me realize, it's like, oh, like, there's actually like an advantage for quick play here of having components that can be distributed broadly as opposed to things in a single rule book, right? And so for the kind of game I'm trying to create, and like I wouldn't say this is like, oh, this is clearly better and all games should do this, right? But like for the kind of game I'm trying to create, having that ability to like hand out the components to the players around the table and let people be doing things simultaneously is a huge boon to that quick play side of the game.
Absolutely.
It's kind of an extension of the idea of, I don't know, character sheets that have all the information you need to play that character on that character sheet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're handing out cards with all the information you need to, say, adjudicate that power is on that card, that saves people flipping to a shared book and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and with Dusk City Outlaws first, and then also I'm doing it a little bit with Spectaculars as well, really tried to make it so that you never have to reference a rulebook during play because all the components have quick reference information on the back. So like the character sheet on the back has the rules quick reference, and your like specialty sheet in Dusk City Outlaws on the back has the flow of play quick reference, right? And then in Spectaculars I'm kind of doing the same thing where like there's a combat quick reference, and then also like your powers have quick reference on them, right? Because I think there's a lot of like, oh, like we're missing out on 5 minutes of entertainment by going to the rulebook for this thing, right? That I tried to basically say like, okay, well, I've got these physical components right here that are sitting on the table in front of you for the entire game. I'm just going to make use of that space in a way that basically makes it so that like you don't miss out on that 5 minutes of fun by
So what you're saying to me is you don't think watching somebody else read a book is fun?
I mean, I like masterpiece theater as much as the next person, right? But
a character sheet or these components, they're basically your user interface. Yeah, so what you're basically doing is you're making an RPG that's as accessible to play for people who are new to it as a board game. Which
Trying
is,
to, yes.
Yeah, yeah. We don't know if you succeeded.
I feel like I did on Dusk City Outlaws, right? And I feel confident about Spectaculars. Let's put it that way.
It's got funny dice in, and Russ says you'd like to play it. And Russ hates.
I do hate
dice.
funny dice, so I have a pathological aversion to funny dice. I didn't get on well with.
Try my funny dice.
I didn't
try my funny dice and see what you think.
The Star Wars and Warhammer dice. I have played games with those dice in. As yet, I have not learnt how to read them. Which I admit is probably, says more about me than it does about the dice. But but yeah,
I mean, thank you. It sounds like a really good idea with these advantage and disadvantage dice and just adding them into the pool. That's a really strong idea.
Yeah. I tried to streamline, right? Like this thing is like it's all about like getting as focused as possible on the core benefits of that system. And I think it works really well. I'm really excited about it. Obviously, I used it a second time in Spectaculars, right? But I guess it's up to people to decide if they like it or not.
Okay. So one really interesting thing that I noticed is there's a random element to power selection in the character creation process, which I was quite surprised to see, but it's not completely random, is it? You form a deck and then you take 5 cards and choose 1 to 3 or something? Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. I mean, so I know that there's a lot of people that are very much in the I want to have complete control over making my character, and I totally understand that. I think for superheroes, because of the legacy of games like Villains and Vigilantes and things like that, there is some precedent in superhero RPGs for okay, I'm going to get this random selection of powers and figure out what to do with it. I also think there's something fun about the sort of puzzle of asking how does this suite of powers and this identity and this archetype, how do these fit together, and what character does it make?
I don't think it's vastly dissimilar, especially when you're talking about a game that's designed for quick play and stuff like that. It's not a million miles away from having a pre-gen anyway, is it? It's just a pre-gen with a lot more flexibility, I guess.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think also, not only is it, sort of fun to play that puzzle-solving game, I think there is something, especially because I'm aiming at a game where new players can jump in just as easily as experienced players. If you present, the complete spectrum of everything you could possibly do, every choice you could possibly make, the blank canvas is super intimidating. And not just intimidating, but a blank canvas is actually harder to solve for than a limited scope, right? By basically saying okay, here's 5 power cards, pick between 1 and 3 of those, I've sort of narrowed the possibility space down. It becomes less intimidating for a new player. Now, all that having been said, I fully recognize the fact that I'm I can't possibly come to everyone's house and be you must play the game this way, right? So if you don't want to do random character creation and you just want to pick things yourself, nothing is stopping you. And in fact, I'm going to include an optional thing in the rulebook that's hey, if you want to build your own character however you want, just flip through the deck and pick what you want and then use those powers, right?
So there was a question I had. So you choose 1 to 3 powers. Why would you not always choose 3 powers?
Yeah, so on your hero archetype sheet, there's 3 slots, right? Because you literally take the card and you set it on top of your archetype sheet, and then where it the slot it plugs into determines how powerful that power is for you, right? So you have a superpower, a lesser power, and a minor power, right? Yeah. Now, the lesser power slot and the minor power slot have a couple of little icons on them. And those icons are the hero point icon. And hero points are a resource that players get that they can spend to do exceptional things. Everybody has a role in the team, leader or tank or striker or whatever. All of those special abilities are powered by hero points, for example, right? If you take a power card and you slot it into one of those 2 slots, it covers up those icons, and so you get fewer hero points than you would otherwise, right? So basically you can say okay, I want to have fewer powers, but then I get more hero points, which is I get more resources to spend. Or I want to have more powers, which means I'll have more exceptional abilities that I can use. and sort of technically more skills by that extension. But I'm going to get fewer hero points. I'm going to have fewer resources to spend as I play along. And then there's a middle ground between those two, which are the basic powers. And so the game comes with 5 basic powers, and there's 4 copies of each. So like anyone could have any of them, right? And it's things like flight and super strength and super toughness, signature weapon, energy blast, very general things, right? And anybody can pick those in addition to like picking from the 5 that you're dealt out from the deck. And those have 1 hero point icon on them, so that when you slot them into like your lesser or minor power slot, it covers up the 2 icons on that slot, but it has 1 hero point on it. So you basically get 1 hero point and a much simpler power, as opposed to like 0 if you have a more complex power, or 2 if you don't put a power in there at all. Right? So there's a spectrum there.
Sure. So what's the sort of room for character advancement? Because you say it's designed for campaign players, one shot.
Campaign play, yeah. I'm working on putting out another one of my basic how to play videos right now that I don't know if you guys have seen those, but
I've seen one of them,
they're super fun. Yeah, they're super fun to create. I'm just using like my own video editing software and this microphone to record the voiceover. But like, so I've been working on it a lot recently, so it's kind of in the forefront of my mind. And so the way it works is that at the end of every session, you get like 1 check on a track that periodically has a spot on the track that's like, hey, you get a story reward. Right. And story rewards are your primary means of advancement, and it can be everything from like very simple ones like, hey, you get an extra hero point every fight, or you get a new skill at 65% or whatever. Right? So pretty straightforward ones. But then I've also got some that are a little more tied into the comic book genre. For example, if you are playing your character and you want to rearrange your powers, you want to get a new power or whatever, you can pick one of these story rewards that's like, hey, you get a new costume, right? Like your character gets a new costume, and getting a new costume means you can rearrange your powers in a certain way, right? So it's like, oh, Spider-Man got his black costume, right? And so like now he has like, slightly different arrangement of his powers and everything. Is like, oh, his Spidey sense is even stronger now, but whatever.
That's what happens when I change clothes. I mean, it sounds reasonable.
Exactly, right? Yeah, you
happens for all of
get
us.
totally new powers, right? And so like they're all really steeped in comic book tropes, or there's one that's like team up, right? So when you pick the team up ability, you basically pick another hero that's not on your team roster, and so that means it's like another hero that's been created for a different series, or that's not being played by any player. And then like in the middle of a scene, you can basically be like, oh, my team up buddy shows up, and so they show up for a scene, so you play 2 characters for a little while, and then they leave at the end of the scene or whatever, right? So it's very steeped in comic book like tropes and everything as far as the rewards. And then at the end of that track, after you've gotten like your 5th story reward, is your retirement reward. And so basically this is like, okay, you've played this character for probably a full series at this point. You've got to pick a way that your character is going to either sort of exit the setting or change their role in the setting so that they're no longer a playable hero. And so this is things like, my character is going to pass the mantle on to another hero, right? So like Captain America. Yeah, Captain America gives up being Captain America for a while, and Falcon is going to take over being Captain America. Or it could be something tragic, like, like Batman, back in the 90s, Batman gets his back broken, and Jean-Paul Valley takes over as Batman for a while, or whatever, right? Or it could be things like, oh, your character dies, right? And so like you're basically picking your character's exit stage left, and then you make a new character that you're going to start playing, and that new character starts with like a little bit of an extra bump forward, right? So it's like, okay, like, yeah, you're not playing this character anymore, but you still get some reward for having played so much, right? And a lot of times that's very thematically tied in. So it's like, oh yeah, you passed the mantle on to somebody else. It's like, you're going to play Falcon Cap or Falcon Captain America, right? And so your version of Falcon Cap has maybe some of the same powers as your previous character, but then also some different powers and a different identity and yada yada, right? So like basically what I wanted was, I love like the all the various tropes of comic book heroes, but it's hard to work that into a campaign naturally sometimes. So I wanted to basically put that on the players and say like, hey, sometimes you can just trigger one of these genre tropes, right? Like the costume change is a great example, right? Like that's so hard to work in as a tangible thing in a campaign, but I'm like, you get to choose this. when this happens, right, as one of your rewards. So, like, you know, started putting those things in there. And so, yeah, it's a combination of, like, interesting things that happen to your character that are genre tropey, and then also things that change the world. So, like, one of the retirement rewards is like, hey, your character becomes the new head of, like, the government agency in charge of superheroes, right? So, like, yeah, your character, you can't play him anymore because now he's the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? And so, like... And so, like, you can totally change the setting with your retirement rewards as well.
Sounds very good.
Yeah. You get like five of these rewards, and that gives you enough to, like, kind of evolve your character in a couple of interesting ways, and then the exit stage left. And then one of the things I'm building in is like, hey, so, like, okay, your character exit stage left, and then you play a new character for a while. When it's time for that character to retire, there are ways that you can go back to that old character and bring that character back in. So it's like, oh, Superman died, so now I'm playing, you know, Steel for a little while, and then the character exit stage left, and now, oh, Superman is back. So
I just realised you're quite a sort of Renaissance man when it comes to genres. Really, if you think about, you started off with Star Wars, you did D&D, you've done Dusk City Outlaws, and now you're doing superheroes. I mean, is your goal just to hit every possible genre, or?
I would say my goal is to not be restrained by a genre. Now, that's tricky because I think there are some genres that are more popular than others. Like, I think fantasy has a huge audience, right? So any fantasy game is going to have a massive appeal, right? My big thing is I'm not super interested in creating, like, a product line of, like, 300 products for this one game, right? Dusk City Outlaws is going to largely stand alone. Like, I'm doing some, like, PDF supplements and everything that are just more scenarios, but, like, I'm not interested in creating, like, massive product lines. What I want to create are largely standalone games. Now, I will say for Spectaculars, I am thinking about the future already and thinking about, like, oh, I'm going to do more series because they're really easy to integrate into the game in a way that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's super extendable that way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But again, that's not like, oh, and then here's going to be this source book and then this source book or whatever, right? It's more like, here's more things to use to play the game, right? So one of the reasons why I'm kind of jumping genres a little bit is because I don't want people to get this expectation. They're like, oh, okay, like, everything that this guy creates is going to become this, like, massive product line that needs all the support or whatever. It's like, no, these games kind of stand alone. And, like, I'm already thinking about, like, hopefully, as long as Spectacular is successful, if I'm going to do another game, it will probably be in a different genre. Now, I might do things like, I just recently released a setting hack for Dusk City Outlaws called Neon City Outlaws. Yeah, exactly. And it's cyberpunky, and so, like, I might come back and say, like, okay, like, I'm going to do, you know, Neon City Outlaws as its own, like, full box set one of these days. It's a different genre, but a similar gameplay experience. So, you know, I have some flexibility there.
Ties in with the heists and so forth.
Exactly, right. Yeah,
Oh,
but I
nice.
don't want to be in a position where people feel like, okay, like, these games are a lifetime commitment that I'm making to, like, well, I guess I have to buy all 30 of these supplements or whatever, right? So I think that's the big part of it.
Are there any genres that you're not interested in? Just, you know, no chance, just not me.
I think there's genres that I would not be good at. Let's put it that way. Like, horror is a great example of one that would be really tricky for me because I like horror games, but I'm not super great at understanding, like, the nuts and bolts of, like, why this is interesting. Like, I love Dread. Yeah. But I could never design a game like Dread because, like, that game super understands, like, this is what, like, this is how horror works, right? I could never design something like that because I just don't understand the nuts and bolts of it as well. And I think there's genres where I'm just not the right choice for the person to design that game. Like, there's a lot of great Powered by the Apocalypse games out there that I'm just like, this is not, like, I'm not the person that should design this, right? Like, Monster Hearts is a good example, right? Like, Monster Hearts is a genre that people who are more tuned into that should be the people to design it. That's just not, I'm not the right choice.
Have you ever thought about creating your own Star Wars analog, perhaps? That being
man, I don't know. Like, there are definitely times where I sort of sit down and say, like, you know, if Lucasfilm came to me tomorrow and said, Rodney, I want you to design a new Star Wars game, I could totally do that. Like, 100%. Trying to make an analog, though, like, I don't know.
Tricky.
I'm not super hot on games that are just like one step away from like a super big IP, right? I want my stuff to be different enough that it doesn't seem like, oh yeah, you're just trying to like create this genre with the serial number filed off, right? So I'm not hot on that as a gamer myself, right? I don't think I would do that, but I would totally think about doing Star Wars, realize that it's a huge commitment and cost, and be like, well, thanks, but probably can't pull that off with my little tiny publishing company.
Yeah, well, I think Fantasy Flight have got the Star Wars RPG market kind of sewn up.
I think
right
they got
now.
that one locked up. Yeah, I don't know, but like I do every now and then think about like licensed games. Like it was funny. My wife, when I was doing the Dusk City Outlaws Kickstarter, she misheard me the first time I said the name of the game, and she was like, "What is Dusk City Outlaws?"
That's my next game.
And then we started talking about like what would a DuckTales RPG look like, and like then I went off on this whole like Disney Saturday afternoon or Disney weekday afternoon cartoon track, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I must say, I would play Duck City Outlaws in the same way 100%. I would play Dinosaur Princesses, Duck City Outlaws. I would play these games.
Oh yeah,
like just full on, no holding back.
But I do insist you do so in full cosplay.
Oh, of course. There's no other way to play.
Of course. Yeah. We're talking about licensed games, just going back to that for a second.
Yeah.
You just brought that up. Sometimes you hear horror stories and, some licenses are difficult to deal with. Sometimes you hear that some are lovely to deal with. I've never had a bad experience. I was just...
Good save.
We mentioned when we were talking to Grant and Chris last week about how Star Wars must be it's like the biggest possible license. I think you could possibly... Maybe the Avengers, Star Wars, one of those two is probably the biggest license you could possibly have, and obviously you've done that. Rodney. You've worked on Star Wars. I mean, what is it like working on such a big IP, sort of under the sort of watching eyes of? I suppose it wasn't Disney at the time, was it? It was Lucasfilm.
It was just Lucasfilm, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, how intense is that? Are they like really? Do they scrutinise everything? Are they?
So I would say that it was great working with them because one of the things that Lucasfilm had a handle on was they knew what was right for their IP. Like they were like, okay, we have a very clear vision for what we want this to be. And this was even before like the big like EU, like get rid of all this expanded universe stuff and reboot thing, right? But like even back then, they had a very clear vision for what they thought was good or bad for their IP. They had a database that I could search that was like everything I could possibly want to know. My contacts at Lucasfilm were super responsive. I mean, like if I fired off an email, I could expect a response within a day or so, right? Which is like for any kind of professional industry is amazing, right? So like they were super prepared, and they were super like they had all the resources we could possibly want, access to a huge art database. The flip side of that though is that they had very high standards, and that's not a bad thing. Like I would absolutely say that like it created like very good quality material, but logistically it was often a struggle to get things up to that standard of quality. Especially with like the lower Star Wars was sort of a prestige brand for Wizards, had fewer resources. For a long time, I was the only person working on the RPG. I mean, in fact, basically other than Bill Slavacek, who was my boss at the time, I was the person shepherding the Star Wars RPG on the design and development side. Right. And so like it was tricky with sort of a lower amount of resources to pull that off. But at the same time, like it was kind of made up for by the fact that like I had a lot of support from Lucasfilm themselves. I don't know. Like, I would say the trickier part of working on a license like that was navigating the fan base, because Star Wars has a unique history where, like, there wasn't much of an expanded universe when the West End game Star Wars game was out. There was like basically the Timothy Zahn novels, and that was largely it for a long time.
Came from that game, didn't
exactly,
it?
Yeah. And so there was a tradition among the among the Star Wars RPG products of like creating canon content that would then appear in other things, or like taking references from novels and really fleshing them out. So for a long time, all the people that are like big Star Wars lore hounds are going to the RPG as their reference. Like this is before even like the sort of renaissance of like reference books and art books and everything. There was basically like the Star Wars Encyclopedia, and then there was a whole bunch of RPG source books. Well, by the time I start working on the Saga Edition RPG, that has all changed, right? Like the RPG is no longer the number one resource. There's the website and there's the books and there's this and that and like tons and tons of stuff out there. But a lot of that fandom still expected the RPG to be like the ultimate reference book. And the thing is, I wasn't trying to create that. I was trying to create a game. And so navigating audience expectations is often tricky because I was like, hey, I'm going to make decisions in the design of this product that are to best fit gameplay. And there's a lot of people that are like, I don't care about that. I just want to know how long that starter story is. And I'm like, okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was.
Well, I can see that because I think I'm probably a little bit like that too. I'll look at a licensed IP and I'll turn to the stats for Yoda because I want to know what Yoda's stats are, and then I'll look at his scores and compare them to someone else's and go, wait a minute, okay.
Yeah. Sure, and that totally used to be me
Star
too.
Wars specifically, but it's kind of that attitude, that way of approaching a licensed game. Did Lucasfilm understand fully what an RPG was?
Yeah, actually. So,
I mean, did they get? Because I imagine their licensing department is mainly dealing with lunch boxes and T-shirts and figurines and toys and stuff.
Yeah, so I had two contacts at Lucasfilm. It was Leland Chee, who was the sort of keeper of the holocron. He was the super lore master, and then Chris Gallagher was our contact for like the miniatures games, right? And both of those guys. Like, they knew what we were doing, right? And, like, maybe they didn't play our games, but they understood how they worked. They were also great about, like, if they didn't understand something, they would just ask the questions and totally relied on us for, like, they totally trusted us to make the right decisions for the games themselves, right?
Sure.
So, yeah, both Leland and Chris were really great at sort of threading that needle between, like, hey, this is not a thing that I do. I don't play this game, but I understand it enough to know, like, what you're doing. And, like, I'm sure that like they played D&D before or something like that, right? Because those guys were both like very invested, like I don't want to say geeks because that sounds detrimental, but geeks, right? But
geek culture is fine, surely.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Yes.
So I think they got it right, and they may not have been actively playing it, but they understood. Like certainly. The feedback that I would get from them was never like, oh yeah, you're going to need to make Han Solo's attack bonus a +5 here, right? And like, nothing like that, right?
So they never sort of commented on the actual rules themselves, just more the lore behind them.
I think they would look at it and they would know enough to be like, oh hey, like if this thing was really egregious, like a big, like oh hey, like you've got the wrong weapons on this guy or something like that, they could totally recognize that. Right?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. It's been really amazing having you on. I've learned a lot. There's Spectacular's Kickstarter. It sounds like it's going to do a lot of fantastic things, meet all your design goals of having a really accessible, really quick to play RPG. Any chance it'll be out in time for Christmas?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, not this Christmas, but next Christmas.
For a Christmas.
A Christmas, yeah. No, so yeah, the delivery, the delivery date I'm shooting for is next August.
Fantastic. That sounds like...
Well, I've backed it, so I can't wait to get mine.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for coming on, Rodney. It's always a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm sure we'll cross paths again before then, and I cannot wait to get my hands on this game.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited for people to actually get out there and start playing it, assuming that we succeed in the Kickstarter and it gets made.
Well, absolutely. I'll tell you what, next time we are at Gen Con at the same time, we have to either play that or Dusk City Outlaws, one of the two.
I would be thrilled to do so.
Hello, everyone. Your editor, Daryl, here to remind you about our Patreon at patreon.com/Morrus. Every week, supporters of the show get a bonus episode of exclusive content that was just too much to keep in the full episode. Outtakes, off-topic discussions, more of our favorite game in all the world, alternate takes of each week's sketch, and anything else that just couldn't make it into the show. And yes, even this epic-length episode still has more material, over half an hour's worth that couldn't make it in, including Skype fails, more details about the most middle-of-the-road vampire clan, LARPing, character sheet design, and a lot more. To get immediate access to this and every other Outtakes and Deleted Scenes episode, and help keep the show going, become a patron at patreon.com/Morrus.
That was a long one, wasn't it?
It was fantastic, but then again, Rodney had a lot of interesting things to say. Top chat.
Well, that's the thing. There were so many subjects to cover, weren't there?
Big career, lots of stuff to talk about, all great stuff. So yeah. Russ, does this mean that this is the end of the podcast?
I think it does.
Oh, but I was having such fun. Oh, never mind. I suppose there's always next week.
Yeah, there's always next week. Yeah, so thank you so much, everybody, for listening. It's been a blast, as always. It is goodbye from me, Russ.
And it's goodbye from me, Peter Coffey, from the Southampton Guild of Role Players.
And it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from him.
And it's goodbye from me.
It would be goodbye from Rodney as well. Goodbye, Rodney.
And it's goodbye from Rodney.
Yeah. And goodbye from Django.
And it's goodbye from me.
And from Django.
And from Django. Yeah. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
That was the best podcast yet. No, I'm just joking. It was awful. The dog that was howling outside my bedroom window last night would have done a better job. I'm considering swapping Russ and Peter's heads just to see what will happen. Do let me know next week if you notice any difference.